Welcome to the Innovation Meets Leadership podcast. Real inspiration for real innovators. If you're looking for innovation and leadership transformation, your journey starts now.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Innovation Meets Leadership podcast. I'm your host, Natalie Born. Hey, if you have listened to our podcast even once, I would love for you to please go out and rate us so that other innovators like you can find us. I'm so excited. Today, we are talking to Tinsley English. She's a recognized expert for female leadership development. She's a dynamic keynote speaker and an author, and she's a creator of a transformative system called G-Force Code. Can't wait to talk about that a little bit. And she empowers women to embrace their leadership abilities. And even more exciting, she has a brand new book out. So we're going to talk about that a little bit today. Welcome to the podcast, Tinsley.
Thank you, Natalie. I am thrilled to be here with you.
Well, let's dive right in. I mean, we have a lot to cover, but I'd love to start out and have you just give us a little bit of your backstory. Tell us a little bit about how you came into leadership. And then the cool thing is, as you're talking, people can actually chat in questions because
Great.
we're live today. So if you do have questions, please feel free to chat them in as Tinsley and I are talking. We'd love to tackle some of your biggest questions today around.
So I fell into leadership, I will say. And it's kind of like people say they fall into insurance, which is the field that I'm in. I did not fall into insurance. I chose this as my profession. I did not wake up one morning as a little girl and say, I want to go into insurance. But when I got to college, I found that this major, risk management and insurance at the University of Georgia, shout out, go Dogs. These kids were getting fantastic opportunities all across the world and across the country. And so I'll never forget calling my mother one day and saying, hey, I'm changing my major from international business. And she said, okay, what are you going to change it to? And I said, insurance. And she goes, oh, Tinsley, you cannot do that. You are too social. I'm like, wait a minute, Mom, this is a people business. There's so many opportunities. And within a couple months, I had a fantastic internship in San Francisco, and thus began my journey into the insurance field. But I will say with leadership on the brokerage side, at least, as you're progressing as a good, strong individual contributor, as a client service representative or a senior account manager, you tend to start inheriting people on your team and delegating to them. But what I found is, and this is pretty common, you're promoted without an instruction manual. And that was my challenge. There was no, hey, Tinsley, you're leading these people, and here are some pitfalls or some things you need to be aware of. It was just go and make sure these people give clients the best service and are friendly and do their jobs accurately and in accordance with the law. So it was a struggle, Natalie.
Yeah. It's interesting because as you talk about that, and I love that someone just piped in here and said they're loving reading your book so far. Laura said that, as you get into it, oftentimes the way we get promoted is by our hard skills, right? Those things that we have mastered, those things that we've become really good at. And when people are thrust into leadership, oftentimes there is no manual. Nobody sits you down and tells you, hey, you're about to take over a team. Here's how to lead. And so we find that these softer skills, I do think leadership's a hard skill, but it can feel like a softer skill as you're learning it. Oftentimes, we don't have the roadmap. And then as a woman in leadership, even more so, oftentimes we can find that we don't have a roadmap for how to do that. So talk a little bit about what inspired you to write the book and some of the elements that you've been able to pull forward into your own leadership.
So I don't think I could have written this book 5 years ago, 10 years ago. I was not ready. I had not failed forward enough and amassed the amount of lessons and met the people that made differences in my career. I don't think I could have written this book until now. And it was one of those things that it's a 3:00 in the morning wake up call. God tends to do that to me. I think he figures that's the time when nobody else is in my inbox, nobody's in my DMs. And so he always knows that, like, I'm going to get her really good now. And I'll wake up and he says, it's time to put all these lessons that you've learned and the advice that you give young women as they're coming up. It's time to do it now. And when he said now, I did it in 60 days. So it was,
Oh my goodness.
it was crazy. it was nights and weekends for 60 days, and found a publishing company that walked me through the publishing process. And when I first decided to write the book, it was going to be about my story, my journey in insurance. And my daughter said, a daughter and a close friend said, Tinsley, that sounds really boring. I said, no, there's lots of really fabulous, sassy women, fabulous trailblazers in insurance. It won't be boring. But I did take their advice. And so I've included 14 other women in my book, and I call
Wow.
them my G-Force tribe. And they have varied backgrounds. We've got people in public service. We've got someone that was in the banking field and went through a very stressful time and ended up having a heart attack. And now she
Mhm.
coaches women in high stress situations on how to deal with challenging roles and still thrive through those times. So there's all these wonderful women in my tribe, and I collaborate with them regularly. I did a master class on Wednesday night, and we had about 14 women in the class. And my friend Jen Gomez, who's in the book, we call ourselves cheerleaders because we're both very positive, and we want people to get energized about leadership. And it was so amazing, Natalie. These women, none of them knew each other. They're all from different backgrounds. We were sharing and we were laughing and we were being very vulnerable. So I'm having a lot of fun with this process. I did not know that I was going to be 47-year-old woman writing a book about leadership, but here I am.
Well, talk a little bit about G-Force Code. You mentioned that. I would love for you to break that down and just share with our listeners, what is that? What does it mean? How'd you come up with it?
It is a combination of the words grit, growth, and gumption. So I drew out this Venn diagram, and it sounds super nerdy, but I'll show it to you here. I don't know. It's this diagram, and you've got grit, growth, and gumption. Here we go. And they all intersect to form in the middle the G-force code. And what I found when I was looking for a quote unquote instruction manual to help myself as a young leader, I would find books that were written by people that were already established at the C suite level, and I could not relate to what they were saying their struggles were. I was
Yeah.
struggling to find something that was simple and practical that I could relate to. So I found that through my journey, the three things that have helped me get to where I am and lead the way I do is a combination of grit, growth, and gumption. And when I talk about grit, everybody thinks grit is just roll up your sleeves and get it done. But I've found that through studying grit, there's something beautiful within grit, and it's softer than that, and it's the word resilience.
Mhm.
And when you think about resilience, it is thriving, not just surviving through a challenging time or a setback. And when I think about resilience, I think about my mom being a single mom, started a business on her own. And I don't know how she paid the bills sometimes, but they always seemed to get paid. And my sister and I never wanted from anything, but she always could adapt, and she could
Mm.
always come through whatever life threw at her. And so when I think about grit and how it's helped me develop to who I am as an independent leader, I definitely think about my mom.
Wow. Well, when I hear you say that too, I love this quote. I was at a friend's house a couple weeks ago, and one of the quotes she had in her kitchen was that smooth seas don't make a skilled sailor. And it just sounds like that to me when you talk about that factor of grit, that oftentimes in our life, grit is afforded to us by going through the rough seas, not by having smooth seas. And so you don't actually know what's inside of you until it's tested. And I love that about grit, that grit actually pulls out what's inside of us when we're tested and when we're put to the test. Talk a little bit about growth and gumption.
I'm going to talk about gumption next. Gumption is a little bit different than guts. So guts is more a momentary burst of doing something like jumping out of an airplane, going skydiving. Gumption, you're being more strategic about the decisions you're making. You have weighed the risks and the rewards, and you've decided to move forward. And
Mhm.
I believe that women can be our own worst enemies when it comes to gumption. We all hear the statistics about, a woman won't apply for a position unless she's 99% qualified. I hope that's changing.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you, gumption is It's trying something new and moving forward in a way that you're not scared to go.
Mhm.
I heard this quote the other day and I've started doing it, and it was W.C. Clements that said, "Do it now." So it's kind of like the Nike Just Do It, but it's a little bit different. And he would say every day on the way down the elevator and up the elevator, "Do it now, do it now, do it now, do it now." It's 100 times. And once you start hearing that, it's wired into your subconscious, and you're not as afraid to do things. And I like to tell people, if you're not doing something every day that gives you a little bit of a tingle, then you're not living right. You have to take chances in your
Yeah.
life. And I really want to see more women take chances. On our call the other night, there was a wonderful lady who used to be a client of mine, and she was saying that she was scared to maybe start her own business. And I was like, why? You've got all the skills to do this for other clients, and you've been paid for 20 years to do it for a large corporation. And so we're working through that. But it was almost like I had to tell her that she didn't need permission from anybody else, that she could go out on her own and do it now.
Yeah. I find that this is the area where most individuals struggle, no matter age or stage of life, is having a dream and taking that terrifying leap to go from where you are today to where you're called to be. And that messy middle, I think, is what stops a lot of people in their tracks. And unfortunately, if we allow it to happen over time, we look back and we have these regrets, these things called regrets, right? Where we didn't step out and do that thing that we felt a fire in our heart to do. And I think, extrapolate out to the worst case scenario and say, okay, what happens if I fail? What will I learn? And I think that there's so much in that. And I feel like in some ways that gumption might go hand in hand kind of with the growth idea that you have as well, because it takes gumption to say, I'm going to grow in an area. I'm going to try something new that I've never done before.
So the growth piece was my Achilles heel as that early leader. It was bad. I couldn't figure out what I was doing wrong with my teams. I just wanted them to work hard and do exactly what I did and just model my behavior and respond to clients just the way I did. And for doing a proposal, you're going to do it exactly like I did, and everybody will be fine. And I was not taking the time to get to know them as individuals. I would be friendly with them, but I was there to make sure that they did their jobs effectively.
Mm.
And I would go home at night and I would tell my husband, my team's just not responding to me. They go to lunch without me. I just don't feel like I know what I'm doing. And so I hired a fabulous lady named Sheila, and she was my executive coach. So she did a 360 review of me and interviewed my direct reports, my producers, my husband. And I told Steve, I was like, I cook your dinner, so you watch what you say about me. And what it came back with, Natalie, was that I had very low emotional intelligence.
Mm.
And back in 2016, that was not a buzzword. That was not anything anybody was talking about. Talking about your feelings at work and understanding who you really were was just not on the top of everybody's priorities. But she said, it's specifically, it's the element of empathy.
Yeah.
And so that is where the growth piece is. And when I talk about growth in the book, I do lean into learning about emotional intelligence and learning about empathy. And I break the emotional intelligence piece down into very simplistic terms. Everything in the book, it's the KISS theory. I want it to be somebody that has gotten their master's degree can read, but somebody that is coming out of high school can read, that's going to college. I just wanted it to be extremely simple to break down the tools that someone would need. And the cool thing about it is all of these elements can stand on their own. Grit, growth, gumption, and the
Yeah.
strategies within them, they can stand on their own, but it's when you bring them together and they synergize that you can move forward with that confidence. So that's the magic of the G-force code. It's a toolbox and a toolkit of, okay, this is what I'm facing with today. What do I need to draw from here? Like,
Mhm.
do I need to dial up the empathy in this situation? Or do I need to step out and say what I want to say in a meeting and really lean into that gumption?
I love this because, I think the way I've kind of summarized this segment is like, your IQ gets you to the table of leadership, but it's your EQ that really keeps you there. And so that is the shift when you become a leader, right? You go from focusing heavily on your IQ to now you have to build that EQ muscle. And I can't tell you, Tinsley, the number of leaders I talk to that say that they all dealt with this issue. So part of the challenge for younger leaders is just saying that, hey, you're going to probably deal with the same thing. Unless you are just so skilled in the EQ area, you're probably going to deal with the same thing as you make that shift from being very focused as a subject matter expert to shifting into more strategic situations where you're helping to lead a team or you're helping to take a team from point A to point B. Now it's not about just what you know, it's about that empathy. It's about being able to connect. It's about being seen as a real person that can be connected with. And I think that that's such a challenge for many leaders to make. As a matter of fact, I was talking to somebody that was highly, highly skilled, all the pedigrees from a education standpoint, like go down the list. He had all of these things that you could check the box on.
Mhm.
But when you actually had a conversation with him, his EQ was so low that talking to him could be a little bit jarring.
Mhm.
That's when you realize, man, like we've got to help leaders not just focus on the IQ, but focus on the EQ. And I love that you're calling that out as one of the biggest features of leadership. It's what we all need in order to relate to the world around us.
And women, we think we've got to be perfect. Like your team doesn't need you to be perfect. They need you to be relatable. And I see women in all industries that I come across. They're trying to project that they've never had a failure, they've never done anything wrong. And they're being really hard on other women in their organization.
Mm.
They're treating them in a way, well, I had to claw my way up. I had to do this all myself. She needs to. And I always say to them, would you talk that way about your daughter? Like, would you want somebody treating your daughter that way or your sister that way? No. No, you need to make sure that you are giving her everything that you did not have. And that's this book. It is kind of a love letter to Tinsley at 34 or 35. And I was telling somebody the other night on this master class we taught that I shared a picture of Ella and I, my daughter and I, sitting on our front step after church one day. And Ella's looking at me, like beaming up with me. She's about this big. And I was smiling, she was smiling. It looked like the world was perfect. And what I told the group was, you see what you see, but I know what was going on in the mind of that woman in the picture. She was on the struggle bus. She was scared to go to work every day because she was thinking she was going to do something so poorly that she was either going to get let go from her position, or her team was going to be taken away, or she was going to give somebody the wrong advice. And so we all have to be vulnerable and say, hey, I see that you're struggling. Let me tell you about a time that I really missed the mark, or I had a failed project, because I want you to be able to come to me and share those things. And that psychological safety is just so important.
This is beautiful. In my work, we talk to clients a lot about the Maslow hierarchy of needs. And we know that at that bottom rung, right, is your safety and security. It's all those things that you have to have in order to just feel okay. And I
Mhm.
feel like oftentimes, like when you talk about the 34-year-old self, oftentimes if we're not secure in our leadership, or we haven't had someone kind of put their arm around us and say, hey, let me just show you the way. Oftentimes through our leadership, some of the things we do or don't do is because we're operating out of a place of scarcity.
Mhm.
And I think that early in my career, that was so true for me, that when I was operating out of a place of, think about this, right? Oftentimes when we don't feel safe, we go into fight, flight, or freeze. And then think about how that impacts and affects your leadership when you're in that mental state of always feeling like your cortisol is high. So you're not
Mm.
thinking with your most intelligent part of your brain. You're kind of thinking with the limbic brain, and it really puts you in a state where you can't even be effective. And so, oftentimes, what we don't realize is when we live in that state and we lead others through that state, we can oftentimes project that onto our teams, and then they will also behave in a way that is not effective for them. And so, part of, I think what we learn over time as a leader is that you have to be a whole person in order to lead other people. And it is so hard to look yourself in the mirror and say, you're not a whole person right now. And the way you're leading, the way you're operating is not effective, and it's impacting the team in a harmful way. And so having that anchor, putting that anchor down and being able to have an anchor in who you are and who you're called to be. I love that you said, "Hey, I couldn't have written this book 10 years ago. I couldn't have written it 5 years ago. I had to write
No
it
way.
now." Because once you're able to find that anchor as a leader, you're able to then turn around and give back to other people in a way you couldn't do when you were fighting and scraping and clawing to climb that ladder on your own. And so it's just a beautiful piece of work, Tinsley, that you've put together with this book, because
You.
it really does speak to the heart of how we have to lead and grow.
And I did put in the subtitle, it's 3 keys to lead yourself and others with confidence, because you really do. It sounds trite, but you have to learn to lead yourself first. And there's a quote in the book. It was a Ken Blanchard quote, and he says,
Love that.
"Leadership is not about you. It's about investing in the growth of others." And I love Ken Blanchard. He's fantastic.
Me
But
too.
I like to tweak it a little bit and say leadership is not about just you. It's about investing in the growth of yourself and others. So I throw the you back in because I do think you have to invest in your own growth. And when you invest in something, you are giving it time and attention and
Mhm.
diligence, like investing into the stock market. You're not going to go put your money on something you don't think is going to be successful. So you're going to take time to study the market and understand how well it could perform. It's the same thing with your own leadership development. You have got to invest in, and it doesn't mean going and getting an MBA in leadership or some kind of advanced degree. It is just stretching those muscles every day that you don't naturally go to. Just like my empathy piece, I didn't naturally draw from that, even though I was a nice person. I didn't understand that my team needed that care and concern. So I really do I just wanted to write something and put it out into the world that meant something and could leave a legacy of impact for women, no matter what their background is.
It's interesting. I have a leader that says, "Hey, when you reach 40, you have to then turn around. It's time in your career. You've learned enough, you've amassed enough giftings, talents, EQ, IQ, that it's really time to turn around and start to give back." And I love thinking about it that way, because it is such a powerful concept that when you hit right around that 40-year-old mark, it's now not about you anymore. It's about turning around and figuring out, who can I pull up and how can I even give maybe things that I didn't get in my own career? How can I give those things to other people? I love some of the comments that are coming in online. Again, another just, "Hey, Tinsley's book is fantastic." And then also, investing in yourself is like self care. It's not selfish, it's a priority. And I love that Ashley said that, because when you talked about the woman who is in your book and she talked about having a heart attack, so often, right? If we're busy, we can even ignore our own health signs that are telling us, "Hey, you need to slow down, or you need to pause, or you need to go, to the doctor," whatever that looks like. Oftentimes we can think that we can just power through all that and lead. And even the message, right? Turning back around and giving back to the next generation, the message of caring for yourself is not selfish. I think that's a pretty powerful thought as well.
Natalie, I want to stress that so heavily because I went through my own health struggles in 2023. I was ignoring some symptoms that had to do with early menopause, and I just was too busy to think about it, and just taking some very basic direction from my primary care physician, and wasn't really digging deeper into what was going on with my health. And I ended up in the hospital in a near death
Wow.
experience because I was putting myself on pause. And especially right now, so many of my generation X, we're starting to go through the menopause, the perimenopause, and we think, oh, it's just a change and we all have to do it, and just don't talk about it. I love that there's more awareness around it, but I had to learn the hard way that you cannot ignore some of these symptoms. You have got to
Mhm.
find a provider, and it might not be a traditional provider, but you've got to find a provider that's going to listen to you and understand what kind of struggles. Because I think about it, I'm like, I actually put myself at risk of not being here to see my daughter graduate high school, and that just kills me. So I really want more women to come out and start speaking and be vulnerable about what we're going through in our health struggles. And I got a little bit off topic, but self-care is not selfish, and we really need to normalize the conversation.
Yeah, it's powerful. Here's the truth, and this is a hard truth, I think, for a lot of people to hear. But, if you don't take care of your health, that desk that you occupy is gonna be filled in 2 to 4 weeks with someone else, and you won't be here, and I hate to say it that way because it sounds kinda harsh, but I do wanna jar us into the reality of how important it is to care for ourselves, how important it is to make sure that we're putting our health first so that you can have that longevity. I think that longevity is probably another critical topic that this generation needs to turn around and talk to earlier generations about, is that in order to lead for the long haul, you
Yeah.
have to take care of yourself. You can't burn the candle at both ends every day, Monday through Friday, even working on the weekend. Like that can be done in pockets for big projects, but it shouldn't be done as a lifestyle. And when we live that way, we don't afford ourselves our future. We kind of steal our future for the now. And so I love that we're leaning into this topic. It's not something we often talk about, but I think it's so important. I think it's one of the ways that as you get older and you learn, you can turn back around and say, "Hey, I've learned some things and I want to share those with you so that you don't go through the same pitfalls. You don't deal with the same issues I dealt with." And I think that's very important as a leader to be able to pour back into the next generation in that way. And I love what this person said is, thank you for your vulnerability, Tinsley. When we allow ourselves to be vulnerable, we become real to others. And I love that that person said that
Ah,
because you talked
that
about
makes
that
my heart
earlier, right?
grow.
Yeah, it's special. And so I think that just going back to this Maslow hierarchy of needs, a lot of what we're dealing with leaders is how do we get them out of that survival mode so
Mhm.
that they can be more effective? And I think that your book gives us a roadmap. It helps us kind of navigate these waters. So, first of all, I want to ask if you have your book, can you hold it up so we can
Yes,
see
sure.
it? Looks so great. Awesome book here. I love the cover that you selected. It's so
Thank you.
beautiful. And just tell us a little bit about where we can find it. Where can we follow you if we
Sure.
want more of this content?
So you can find it on Amazon. You can also go to my website, and the cool thing about the website is on the first page there, you enter your name and your email address, and you can download a toolkit, and it's a workbook, and it gives you a small sample of the grit, growth, and gumption assessment, so you can start realizing areas that you want to lean into and areas that you naturally draw from all the time. And then it gives you a 3-week set of journal prompts based on resilience, emotional intelligence, and being your authentic self. So it's just like the workbook that goes alongside the book. I just want people to carry this book, the workbook, in their purse. I want it to be messy. I want coffee stains on it. I want them to scribble, scrabble in it, and just use it. Use it as a tool until some of those now all of these principles that I'm talking about today, I just go to them very easily, but I want people to start using it and drawing from those easily. Uh, Speaking is one thing that I've always loved to do. I didn't know I liked to do it in a larger setting. So definitely want to share this message on a larger stage. I did want to mention, Natalie, God did get in my DMs a little bit a while ago after I wrote the book. I said, there you go, God. Like, here you go, wrote the book. Like, now I'm going to go back to my Netflix and my life. And he's like, oh, and by the way, one thing, I want you to get this book to 1 million women by 2026. And
Wow.
so he has not revealed that to me yet, how we're going to make that happen. But I'm keeping my eyes open for opportunities because I there's something about, and there's a global thing that's going on in my head. I used to mentor some women on Zoom in Africa. And so there is something about Africa that it's just saying that this book needs to be there. So we're just going to keep telling the story and pushing it till other women in other countries find out about it. And I saw something that if somebody buys the book and then they give it to 3 women, and then those 3 women give it to 3 women, it's not going to take us that long to get to 1 million women.
That's really cool. I love that. And I love these big dreams, these big goals, and just being like, okay, I don't know how it's going to happen, but he'll do it. And that's really cool. I have loved this conversation with you today. I think it's been so special. And I just want to thank you for joining me because, it went by super fast. I feel like we could talk so much longer. Betty just commented and said she's loving your book. You're truly an inspiration. I
Thank you
love
very
these comments that are coming in from people who are currently in the book, actively reading it. Just love that so much. Look, gritgrowthandgumption.com is where you can go to find out more about Tinsley. Please follow her if you're not already following her on LinkedIn, Tinsley English. And look, I just want to say thanks again, Tinsley, for just pouring into us and taking the time to sit down and say yes and write this book, which is so powerful.
Well, Natalie, I'll say a quick thing about just doing it. Do it now. I have listened to your podcast for a long time. And on my walk today, I was listening to a couple of episodes and I'm like, oh my goodness, she has got people that have started global corporations, have led all over the world. They used to work for Amazon, all of these different things. And I'm like, oh man, this is going to be, I don't know if I'm up to this task. And then I caught myself and I said, hello, that's imposter syndrome. And I just turned around. I told that little voice, I said, shut up, we're doing it. So it has been a pleasure. I've loved every minute of it. And just, I want to send lots of love and light to all the women and men that listen today, and just go share the message, and whatever you're holding back today, do it now.
Do it now. I love that final thought. Do it now.
Do it.
I love the Lester Brown quote, right? I'm going to butcher it, but it says the graveyard is full of people who didn't write the poem, didn't start the business, didn't write the book, didn't write the song. The things that are in your heart, burning, the passion that you have, it's for a purpose. It's there for a reason. And Tinsley and I want to say, do it now. So there's your push to get out of the boat, walk on the water. It's safe. You can do it. Thank you again, Tinsley, for your time. It's been awesome.
I love you, Natalie. Thanks so much.
Well, to our listeners, thank you for joining the Innovation Meets Leadership podcast. And remember, don't just get out of the box, break the box and set it on fire. Let's go transform something. We'll see you next time.
Thank you for joining us for the Innovation Meets Leadership podcast. Be sure to subscribe to our show on iTunes. Follow us on Instagram or Facebook at Innovation Meets Leadership, and visit our site at innovationmeetsleadership.com for more innovation resources.
Hey, my new book is out, Set It on Fire, The Art of Innovation. Click on the link to learn more. And don't just get out of the box, break the box and set it on fire. Let's go transform something.